The Antonine Wall, once the northernmost frontier of the Roman Empire. Almost 60 kilometres in length, the fortifications run from coast to coast between the modern Scottish cities of Glasgow and Edinburgh. The frontier dates back as far as the 2nd century AD, but it still remains visible at several locations. Recently, it has been nominated a World Heritage Site. UNESCO's decision is to be announced in summer 2008. The Antonine Wall is one of the most interesting Roman frontiers. It was built mainly of turf and timber. The frontier consisted of a huge ditch still visible today in some locations. At Watling Lodge, the ditch survived almost to its full depth and width. In front of the ditch there was an earth and timber wall, a steep rampart. It was probably 3 meters high, and all of it was built on a stone base. At the very well-preserved Roman fort of Rough Castle, so-called lilie, defensive pits, are visible between the rampart and the ditch. They held wooden stakes and were covered with brushwood. They were used to stop enemies approaching the frontier. Forts like Rough Castle were spaced out at regular distances along the Antonine Wall. First there were 6 forts, later 6 more forts were added. Outpost forts provided for additional surveillance of the frontier zone. Watchtowers and fortlets were built between the forts along the Antonine Wall, ensuring a well-guarded frontier.
In its original format, it follows in broad terms Hadrian's Wall. We have a linear barrier, though in this case it's turf and timber built on a cobble base rather than stone built. Though remember that the third of Hadrian's Wall in its original format was also a turf built. We then have the originally forts at 8-mile intervals with mile fortlets in between, the equivalent of the mile castles.
It was the Roman legions, soldiers from the south, that built the Antonine Wall. Their efforts were recorded in stone. Many inscriptions and also 20 highly ornamented slabs have been found along the Antonine Wall.
They're called the distance slabs because each of them provides an exact piece of information about the distance, the length of the wall which a particular detachment of a legion has contributed to the whole project.
The distance slabs are among the most important imperial military sculptures on any frontier of the Roman Empire.
They show scenes which symbolise the victory of the Roman army over the local Caledonian population. So, for example, on this stone we see a scene of victory in the centre here, and you would see on either side there are representatives of the local population which has been defeated by the Romans. So even if the passer-by was unable to read any of the Latin inscription, he would nevertheless be able to get an idea of what was being commemorated here.
Distance slabs and many other Roman finds are on display at the museums along the Antonine Wall. The legions built this frontier on the orders of the Emperor Antoninus Pius, who decided to abandon Hadrian's Wall and to occupy southern Scotland.
Roman frontiers didn't always stay static. I mean, Hadrian's Wall was big, it was 10 Roman feet wide as planned, a substantial monument, but it was abandoned only a few years after the death of Hadrian, and the Roman army moved back into Scotland and built a new frontier, the Antonine Wall, where we are now. And so for a generation, the Antonine Wall was the edge of the Roman Empire.
The Antonine Wall fortifications were occupied by auxiliary troops. They controlled border traffic and prevented smaller attacks on the frontier. Today, the Antonine Wall is cared for by Historic Scotland. The agency was established in 1991 to safeguard the nation's built heritage and promote its understanding and enjoyment. The role of Historic Scotland receives wide public support, and its tasks are important in order to preserve the Antonine Wall for future generations. The World Heritage label would give additional support to safeguarding these interesting Roman monuments.
Archaeological monuments like this one are a tangible manifestation of that history, that they're things you can see and touch that are thousands of years old and that can connect you with documented events like the Roman invasion of Scotland, which I think is so important to keep these still accessible and visible.
To complete the application to become a World Heritage Site, much measuring and planning work had to be undertaken along the Antonine Wall. The Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Scotland played a leading role in this. UNESCO needs to know exactly where the Antonine Wall was situated and which monuments have survived. If the application goes well, the Antonine Wall will join Hadrian's Wall and the German Limes as a World Heritage Site. In future, more parts of the Roman frontier will follow.
The project started because two countries, Britain and Germany, proposed their parts of the Roman frontiers as a World Heritage Site. And rather than go forward separately and independently, it seemed a good idea to go forward together. Several countries across Europe, the Antonine Wall here in Scotland, but also Austria, Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia, have already indicated their intention to put forward their parts of the frontiers as elements within this new multinational World Heritage Site. And I think this is really challenging and helpful to us all to work together and be encouraged to work together in this way.
The Antonine Wall is a fascinating monument. Built by soldiers from all corners of the vast Roman Empire, it is not only a monument for Scottish or British history. It is a reminder that Europe was once united under the Romans, and that Scotland was part of one of the greatest empires ever.